All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. We're taking a trip into the world of human genetics today.
That's right. And we'll be doing it like a biology class, just like you asked for.
So think karyotypes, pedigrees, um, even some really interesting genetic conditions.
Oh, like hemophilia.
Yeah, and color blindness, too.
It's kind of like cracking a code, isn't it? Human genetics, I mean.
Totally. It's all about figuring out how traits get passed down through families, like detective work.
Exactly, like finding clues in our DNA. But first, let's talk about karyotypes.
Karyotypes. Ever seen a picture of all your chromosomes all laid out?
Like a genetic photo album.
That's it. But how do they actually make those?
Well, they grow cells in a lab,
Okay.
and then they got to stop the cell division at a specific point, like when the chromosomes are all condensed and easy to see. It's called metaphase.
Ah, metaphase.
Yep. Then they stain them, take pictures, and arrange them all nice and neat in pairs.
So it's like a puzzle, right?
Yeah, but each chromosome has its own special spot based on its size and shape, even its own banding pattern,
Wow, that's pretty detailed. And they can use any cell for this, right?
as long as it can grow in a lab.
So blood, skin, all that.
Yep, that's what makes karyotyping so useful. You can do it with different types of cells, and it helps us identify those chromosome problems.
Like when there's an extra chromosome or one missing.
Exactly, or even if they're rearranged in a weird way.
So chromosomes are important. And there are a lot of them, huh?
23 pairs to be exact.
23.
Yep, and they're all numbered by size, biggest to smallest.
So chromosome 1 is the big guy.
You got it. And then, of course, you've got your sex chromosomes, the X's and the Y's.
Okay, so that's karyotypes. But what about those family trees we always hear about? The ones that trace specific traits.
Ah, you mean pedigrees.
Pedigrees, right? Like a family tree, but for genetics, I guess.
That's a great way to put it. They use symbols for people, like squares for males, circles for females, and lines to connect them.
So if you were looking at eye color, for example,
Yeah.
you could see who in the family had blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes.
Exactly. It's all about tracking that trait. And get this, when you combine pedigrees with what we know about Mendelian genetics, you can figure out even more.
Like whether a trait is dominant or recessive.
Uh-huh. And if it's linked to autosomes,
Also,
those are the non-sex chromosomes.
oh, right, right. Or they can be sex-linked, which means they're on the X or Y chromosome.
Yeah.
Now it's starting to make sense. It's like solving a family puzzle. And, it makes you wonder about all the traits in your own family.
Definitely. I bet everyone has some interesting traits that run in their family, things that make you go, I wonder where that came from.
For sure. Like my aunt's curly hair, everyone always asks if she gets a perm. But speaking of traits, let's talk about hemophilia. You mentioned that earlier. What's so unique about it?
Well, hemophilia A is a blood clotting disorder, and it's a classic example of something called X-linked recessive inheritance.
X-linked recessive, meaning the gene for it is on the X chromosome.
Right. And remember, females have 2 X chromosomes, and males have 1 X and 1 Y.
So does that mean males are more likely to get hemophilia because they only have one X?
Bingo. If they get the X with the hemophilia mutation, they've got it. But females would need the mutation on both their X chromosomes to have hemophilia.
Gotcha. It seems like genetics really is a game of chance. And speaking of inheriting things, didn't some famous royal family have issues with hemophilia?
Ah, you were talking about Queen Victoria and the European royals. She carried the hemophilia mutation.
And passed it down to some of her descendants.
Exactly. One of her sons, Leopold, had it, and one of her granddaughters, Alexandra, who married Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, took it into that royal family.
Wow, talk about a ripple effect.
Hmm.
Who knew one genetic condition could have such a big impact on history? It shows you just how much genetics is intertwined with everything, doesn't it? Our past, our present, and even our future.
You said it. Genetics is a pretty powerful force. It shapes individual lives, but it can also influence the course of history itself.
Mind-blowing. But all right, let's move on to another one, color blindness. I've always been curious about how people with color blindness see the world.
It's basically about being unable to tell certain colors apart. Red and green are the most common. And, color blindness is also X-linked recessive.
Just like hemophilia, more common in males.
Yep. It's all because of problems with the genes that make opsins.
Opsins, what are those?
They're these light-sensitive pigments in your eyes. We have 3 types, red, green, and blue, that help us see all the different colors.
So if someone doesn't have the red opsin, they can't see red properly.
That's the idea. And because the genes for those red and green opsins are on the X chromosome, again, that's why males are more likely to inherit color blindness if their mom is a carrier.
Makes sense. But, this whole thing with X-linked inheritance just reminded me of something really weird. What about those cases where females who are Heterozygous for color blindness, meaning they have one normal gene and one mutated gene, end up with color blindness in only one eye. How does that even happen?
Oh, yeah. That's wild, right? It's because of something called X chromosome inactivation. Early on, when a female embryo is developing, one of the two X chromosomes in each cell is randomly switched off. It's like a coin toss.
So in some cells, the X with the normal color vision gene might be active, but in others, it's the one with the color blindness mutation that's active.
Exactly. It creates a mosaic pattern. So some parts of the body, even one eye, can be affected by the color blindness, while others aren't. It really shows you how complex gene expression can be.
It's like having two different genetic profiles within the same person.
It's true. Genetics is full of surprises.
It never gets boring, that's for sure. So we talked about hemophilia and color blindness. Those are both X-linked recessive. Are there any other X-linked conditions that people might not know about?
Well, there's Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's a much more serious one. It causes muscles to waste away.
I've heard of it, but don't really know much about it. What causes it?
It's a mutation in the dystrophin gene, which is on the X chromosome.
Dystrophin. What did that do?
It makes a protein that protects your muscle fibers from damage, when they contract and relax.
Well,
Without enough good dystrophin, the muscle fibers break down and get replaced by scar tissue. That's what causes the muscle weakness and wasting.
so people with Duchenne's just get weaker and weaker over time.
Pretty much, yeah. And it gets worse as they get older. The symptoms usually start showing up between 2 and 6 years old. Kids might have trouble walking, running, climbing stairs.
That's so young.
I know. And as it gets worse, they might have muscle pain, get tired easily, and just be weak overall. Many of them need a wheelchair by their early teens.
It sounds incredibly challenging for both the people who have it and their families. Is there any cure or treatment?
Unfortunately, no cure yet, but research is happening all the time. There's hope for gene therapy and new drugs that could slow it down or improve quality of life. It's a tough one, but scientists are working hard on it.
That's good to hear. It's so tough to think about the challenges they face. Talking about these genetic mysteries makes me think of detectives, like in a murder mystery. What if we put our newfound genetics knowledge to the test?
Ooh, I love a good mystery. Tell me more.
Okay, picture this. Lord William, a wealthy bachelor, found dead in his library. Only clue. A witness saw someone with red hair and a bent little finger running away.
Intriguing. But how does genetics play into this?
Well, Lord William's family has a history of red hair, which is recessive, and they also have a history of a bent little finger, which is dominant.
Ah, so we can use the family pedigree and what we know about inheritance patterns to figure out who did it.
Exactly. A real-life genetic puzzle. And just to make it more interesting, Lord William changed his will right before he died, leaving everything to charity.
Ooh, so maybe someone was trying to get their hands on that inheritance. This is getting good.
All right, listener. It's time to channel your inner detective. Using your knowledge of pedigrees and inheritance patterns, can you crack the case of the caped murderer? We'll reveal the culprit in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait to see if our listener can solve it. This is going to be fun. Okay, detective, ready to crack this case? Let's use our genetics know-how to find the caped murderer.
We know they had red hair. Right, that's got to help.
Big time. Remember, red hair, it's recessive. You need 2 copies of that red hair allele to actually have red hair.
Right, 2 copies. And looking back at Lord William's family, his dad had red hair.
So Lord William had to inherit one of those red hair alleles from him.
Which means our murderer also had to get a red hair allele from one of their parents to end up with red hair.
Exactly. That narrows down our suspect list quite a bit, doesn't it? We can focus on the folks who had at least one parent who could have passed on that red hair allele.
It's like eliminating suspects in a classic whodunit. But we have another clue. The bent little finger.
Ah, yes. And that one's dominant. Just one copy of the allele is all you need for that trait to show up.
And remember, our witness saw that bent little finger on the murderer's hand. So we know for sure they had that dominant allele.
Things are getting interesting. So we need someone with both red hair and a bent little finger. Time to check that family tree.
Who fits the bill? I'm thinking we should look closely at Lord William's siblings and their children. They're the most likely suspects, right?
Definitely. They had a motive, a chance to inherit some of that wealth.
Greed and genetics, a dangerous combo. All right, let's start simple. Did any of Lord William's brothers or sisters have red hair?
Let's see. Ah, yes, 3 of them. Edmund, Anne, and David.
So all 3 inherited one red hair allele from their dad, just like Lord William. But did any of their kids get a second red hair allele, giving them that red hair? And if so, do any of those redheaded children also have a bent little finger? It's like a double whammy.
It is. Okay, Edmund's kids, all brown hair, so they're out. But Anne, she had one child with red hair, her daughter Mary.
Mary, did she also have a bent little finger?
She did indeed. Probably inherited that dominant bent little finger allele from her mom, Anne, who also had that trait.
Hmm. Mary is looking like a strong contender here. What about David's kids? Any redheads there?
This is interesting. David actually married a woman with red hair.
Uh-huh. So all their kids would have red hair. That makes sense.
It does, but none of them have a bent little finger.
So we can rule out David's children. It looks like we found our culprit, Mary. She's the only one with both red hair and a bent little finger.
Case closed. Our listener is a true genetics detective.
We solved the case. Amazing how understanding genetics can be so useful. Who knew we'd be cracking murder mysteries with Mendelian genetics?
It just shows you the power of genetics. But, all this detective work makes me think about those deeper questions we talked about before. The whole nature versus nurture thing.
Ah, yes, the big one. How much control do we really have over our destinies? Are we just products of our genes? Or can we shape our own lives? I mean, it's a pretty important question.
Absolutely. On one hand, our genes influence so much about us. Our looks, personality, even our risk for certain diseases. It can feel like our genes have us all figured out.
That's true. But then you see people who totally defy those genetic expectations. It makes you wonder how much power we really have.
It's definitely not a simple answer. Think of it this way. Our genes are like the raw materials, the potential we have. But our environment and experiences, they're like the sculptor, shaping that potential into the people we become. What do you think about that?
That's a great way to put it. So even if someone is predisposed to something like, let's say, heart disease, their lifestyle choices, the environment they live in, even access to healthcare can really affect whether those genes actually do anything or not.
Exactly. We see it all the time. Someone might be genetically prone to heart disease, but if they exercise regularly, eat a healthy diet, and manage their stress, they can dramatically lower their risk. It's amazing, really.
It's like our genes are a starting point, but we get to write the rest of the story. Our choices, our actions, they all matter.
You got it. It's about taking control, not feeling trapped by your genes.
This whole idea has really big implications for how we think about healthcare, education, even social policy, don't you think? If genes aren't everything, then we should be creating environments that help everyone reach their full potential, no matter what their genes are.
I completely agree. Imagine if we invested more in early childhood education, making sure all kids have a chance to learn and grow regardless of their genes. Or what if our healthcare system focused more on preventing disease and giving people personalized care based on their unique genetic makeup? What do you think?
That sounds like a pretty awesome future, using our knowledge of genetics to help people, not hold them back.
Exactly. It's about shifting our perspective, moving away from this idea that our genes decide everything and realizing that we have a lot more power than we think. It's an exciting way to think about the future, isn't it?
Wow, part 3 already. It's amazing how fast the time flies when you're solving genetic mysteries and pondering the big questions of life.
It does, doesn't it? But speaking of those big questions, I think it's time to dive back into that nature versus nurture debate. We've covered how genes affect our traits and our health, but what about the bigger picture?
Right. Are we really just products of our genes, or do we actually have a say in shaping our own destinies? I mean, that's what it all boils down to.
It really is, and it's a question that has puzzled people for ages. If our genes are like this blueprint, this set of instructions, how much freedom do we really have? How much can we actually change?
Yeah, it's easy to think our genes determine everything about us, from our appearance to our personality, even whether we get sick or not. It can feel pretty limiting sometimes.
I get that. But then you see those people who totally defy their genetic predispositions. It makes you wonder, how much power do we actually have?
Exactly. There has to be more to the story. It can't just be all about our genes.
You're absolutely right. It's not that straightforward. It's more about how our genes and our environment work together.
So it's like our genes give us this starting point, this potential. But it's our environment and our experiences that really shape who we become.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Our genes are like the raw ingredients, and our experiences are like the chef who takes those ingredients and creates something amazing. What do you think about that analogy?
I love it. It's like we might be predisposed to certain things,
Yeah.
but ultimately it's our experiences that determine how those predispositions play out. It's kind of empowering, isn't it?
It is. It means we're not just passive bystanders. We have a role to play. We can make choices that influence how our genes affect us, what we eat, how much we exercise, the relationships we build. All of these things matter.
It's like we have more control than we might think.
Hmm.
And that has huge implications for how we approach everything, from healthcare to education to even social justice.
Absolutely. If we know that our environment plays a role, then we need to create supportive environments for everyone. It's about leveling the playing field so that everyone has the opportunity to thrive regardless of their genes.
So instead of just focusing on treating diseases after they happen, what if we put more effort into preventing them in the first place? And what if we created education systems that cater to individual needs and learning styles?
Exactly. We could tailor education to help each child reach their full potential, regardless of their genetic predispositions. And in healthcare, we could use genetic information to personalize treatments, predict risks, and even prevent diseases before they develop. Pretty incredible, right?
It is. It's like taking all this knowledge about genetics and using it to make the world a better place.
It's about empowering people, not limiting them. It's about understanding that we're all unique individuals with the potential to achieve amazing things. And as we continue to unravel the mysteries of human genetics, who knows what other incredible possibilities we'll uncover.
It's an exciting time to be alive, that's for sure. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into human genetics. I hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have.
It's been a blast exploring this fascinating world with you.
And remember, listener, keep that curiosity alive. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep marveling at the power of genetics to reveal who we are, where we come from, and what we can become. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.